Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture. My name is Ben Warner and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve? We've got two topics we'll talk about today, obviously a major one and a minor one, and we'll kick off with the Mac Pro that was announced for pre-order. I think it's you can go in there and buy it to your heart's content and spec it all the way up. I guess we're just continuing on part of our discussion on where Apple is these days. But as as want to do, it's a pastime, a bit of a fun thing to do, to spec this thing up to the hilt. Lots of Apple fanboys do that a lot, and fangirls probably too as well, just to see how much one of these things costs. And this has come out as absolutely the most expensive thing that they've put out there. Now, granted, the 8 terabyte version is still not available, so in theory it should be even more expensive than this, but it's come out at $85,000 Australian. So I'm assuming it'd be $90,000 for the 8 terabyte version whenever that comes out. And the display, that's without the display, of course. If you want the Apple 6K display, which I'm sure is spectacular when you're looking at it.
What size is it? Do we know?
32 inch. So it's a decent sized.
Decent size if you're sitting close to it.
Yeah, exactly. And especially if you got 2 or 3 of them on the desk, right?
Oh, well, yeah. Okay, how much for just the one?
Okay, so it comes in. So there's 2 costs associated with it. Obviously, they've got 2 different versions: a standard and a nano textured one. The standard is $8,500, and the nano texture one is $10,000. Now, if you're one of these pros that mounts them on the wall or something like that you don't need to go any further. But if you're up for the stand, which is a pro stand, mind you, you're looking at...
So you don't lean them up against your Final Cut user manuals then?
That's right. That pro stand's going to hit you, set you back another $1,700.
Wow.
So add all of that up, I think you're into 100K territory right there for this machine. So I know you've sort of enjoyed doing this over the years in terms of speccing out these things. Is that kind of hitting the ridiculous territory, or what do you think?
Well, I hate to go back in time, but in 1999 I bought a G4, which was as specced up as you could go. I had the big drive. I think it was a 10 gig drive, and there was room in the bay for a second drive, which I then subsequently, I think a couple of years later, I put in a 27 gig drive that cost me $660.
Yeah.
And but I bought a Jazz drive, I bought a printer, I bought a scanner. I had everything for that G4 except a monitor, because I used an old G3 monitor. And that came to $4,500. And that was just about the most you could spend on a Mac, I think. And that's with accessories.
So not even in factoring in inflation, there's no way that would have been $100,000 in today's dollars.
It was max RAM, whatever max RAM was back then, maybe 2 gig. I don't know. It was max everything.
There's plenty of YouTube videos of people reviewing it and sort of putting it through its paces and all that, and like you are getting what you pay for, I guess, in terms of performance. So if you're one of those people that has to do 10 8K renders all at once, it just doesn't crack a sweat over it. It doesn't break sweat over doing any of it, whereas obviously the standard machines would probably cop out trying to do that sort of stuff. So I guess if you've got that kind of a workflow, that's fine. And if you're a big corporation, I think we said the other week, isn't it, you drop $100,000, it's probably like spending $1,000 for a personal setup.
Well, that's right. And let's face it, I mean, Hollywood's a bit like the medical world now. If it's medical grade, you just add an extra couple of zeros, and you do that the same with your Mac now, like if it's Hollywood grade. Do you have Ben, because I know you understand these things, if I was just going to go and get a basic Mac now, what would the outlay be for me to say, just be able to cut, I guess, in 4K, maybe render in 8, I don't know.
Comfortably. You'd probably want to get a
at least obviously one of the MacBook Pros, a 13-inch, because the 15-inch is more. Oh, sorry, we're now at a 16-inch. But the 13-inch, which would probably set you back $3,000.
So really, let's say, and then I buy.
And that's not really and that's not speccing it up. So if you'd want to get like the bigger hard drive and bigger SSD and stuff.
So what, we get to around 5 or 6K.
Yeah, which is probably in the ballpark of what you spent originally, I guess. So
that's right. In which case, then it's actually cheaper today than it was back then.
Yeah, absolutely. The interesting thing though is that they've got all these options, like they've got the Mac Mini still floating around, which has been beefed up. You've still got your iMacs and stuff, but the reality is that for most people, like if they're just doing the YouTube type broadcasting or whatever, like we're doing, we can get away with you just get a laptop,
just with high definition. Are you saying? That's what you need?
Oh well, you could probably just use the base MacBook Air for that. Probably, I'm sure it wouldn't have any problems getting through it. But it's just, in a way, it's kind of spoiled for choice in a way that you've got all these, well, not that Apple has heaps of options, but I guess the options they have available, albeit expensive, you could get away with like a base level Mac and do a lot of stuff on it. But having said that, you can do that with a Windows machine too, I'm fairly certain. So it's interesting, but is it just that they're, I guess, to put a bow on it, I guess, is that the whole thing is that Apple's been hammered for the past, 2 or 3 years for not taking care of the pros. I think with this and a couple of the other things that they've done recently, they can't say that they haven't given the pros what they wanted, because this new Mac Pro is basically so customizable that, the Pro, like, all the YouTube videos I've seen of the pros reviewing it, they're all like salivating over it because they can see, oh yeah, we can do this and we can do that, and it looks beautiful. Even if you take the case off, it looks amazing. Even on the inside, all that sort of stuff. And we'll give them the benefit of the doubt that Apple didn't slip in a couple of promotional dollars underneath there.
We didn't slip in the 8 terabyte drive or something just for saying those things. But
yeah,
it's interesting. I think the other thing that maybe we can lament or celebrate, depends on how you look at it, is back obviously 20 years ago, to be a pro at home would be a pro in Hollywood, and you'd have the best, both have the same machine, and really the difference in specs would be minimal.
Yeah.
But today there's a big gap.
Yeah.
Some people are just comfortable in HD, others need 8K, some don't need any rendering at all, and others, they have to recolorize their raw, like files, who knows? So
yeah,
I guess, that's a big workflow, and you need a big machine with a big price tag.
Absolutely. All right, we'll change tracks now to something completely different. I guess still tech related, but I think we might have talked about space junk before. But there was this article on the ABC site that I saw, and it was really the graphic that caught my attention. There's like a little GIF on there, or GIF, however you want to pronounce it, of all the space junk orbiting the Earth currently, and it was quite disturbing, I thought. Looking at it like that, it's not something you think about. I mean, the obvious joke to me is, we've had our fill of, throwing garbage around on the planet. Now we have to throw it out in outer space, and now they've gotten to the extent of launching a new satellite. They're calling it a giant Pac-Man, which effectively will go into orbit and start gobbling up all of this space junk to start clearing it out, because it's actually becoming a problem, and if they want to launch more, missions out there, they've basically got to clear the way for it. And some of the numbers though are ridiculous that I was reading here. It was something like so nearly 2,000 live satellites in space at the moment, and more than 3,000 failed ones.
Yeah,
that's. Like you don't even think, like that's what, over the course of 20 plus, or what, about 70 years or so, we've been able to put that much stuff up there.
Yeah, that's right. But most of those satellites, for instance, have gone up in the last 15 or 20 years. So
yeah,
it's amazing. What I find most exciting about this story is, one, it's a space industry. This is now, being done because we want lots of people in space, and we need to create the space. We need to clean up the junk that we've left up there. The big question is, what are they going to do with that junk? Is it just going to burn up, or is someone going to be a bit more clever and just trash it on the moon? And then in the future, they'll be able to like melt it down
and reuse it.
And reuse it. Yeah, recycle it. I wouldn't be burning it up. I'd be collecting it, and from low Earth orbit, trying some little tricks there, probably to get it out into lunar orbit.
So I mean, that's a lot of material that they could use. Yeah, I mean,
well, it costs a lot of money to get a kilogram of weight into space, or kilogram of mass, I should say, into space. So it's already up there. You don't have to relaunch it, and it's full of all these great alloys that we need for space travel and life in space. It's all space grade materials. So it would make a lot of sense to scoop it up and find a way to tow it out deeper into space, and then potentially reuse it.
And hopefully there's a crack team working on that as we speak. If hopefully this Pac-Man satellite can, do some of that, or at least get rid of some things that aren't working or whatnot. And then there's the other component of the private sector, I guess, coming in to do some of this too. So I'm not 100% sure, but I'm guessing the last 15 to 20 years, a lot of that might have been private. Some of that might have been private that had gone up in terms of satellites and stuff.
A lot of the communication satellites, yeah.
So,
but of course, there's going to be more and more satellites now, and with increased capability. And so, but there's whole networks up there that failed or just never worked quite properly, and they just left them there. So that's what a lot of these dead satellites are.
Isn't that something that they would have to build into any future satellites that get put up there? That I'm presuming that none of these things last forever, and they have to figure out an end of life strategy for some of this stuff. Maybe they didn't think about that earlier because it was just a colossal sort of undertaking to get one up there in the first place.
That's right. So in the past, and this is the philosophy, that typically pervades our civilization to this point, which is you take, make, and dispose. And the plan always has been in the past, when the satellite gets to the end of its life, it'll just drop down and burn up in the atmosphere. But, the reality is you might have spent a few $1 million getting your payload into space. And not only that, the satellite didn't come cheaply either. That's tens of millions. So why wouldn't you it's up there. You don't have to relaunch it. You don't have to remake it. You just need to get it somewhere where it can be reprocessed or repurposed. And we're seeing more of that circular thinking now in everything we do with, say, water systems, which recycle and reuse, battery storage, the whole idea that you can keep these cycles or cyclic use of energy and resources. And so if the resource is there in space, it makes sense not to let it burn up, but to catch it and reuse it, or find a way to reuse it.
And I guess just finally too, if they can find a way, and this wouldn't just be for creating satellites, I guess it could be creating any sort of tech that would be used in space, is to find a way to actually create it in space as opposed to actually doing it on Earth. But that obviously requires the creation of a technology to do that. I mean, I think I can't remember what it was. Was it? I can't remember what it was. We talked about it on a previous episode. It's sort of like a space lift that goes up into space, and that sort of thing. Hopefully that's being worked on as well. I would have thought that if you just get that in place, it solves a lot of problems and would also save a lot of money as well.
Oh, look, yeah, I agree. And I think, if you consider the motivation of the space race, which was to get at space, get into the moon at whatever cost, and that includes, waste. Yeah. You need to waste it to get there, then it's no big deal. But as we move into space, we know the dangers of junk. I was going to say, if anyone who's seen Gravity would appreciate that. We know the dangers of junk, and not, just the fact that we don't like waste anymore really in this planet. We realise the error of our ways. as you've just pointed out, it's a resource. So if you can reuse it in space, you don't have to take it there. You don't have to build it in space. So I think you'll see the focus now for really for space exploration is creating closed loop systems where everything is used and reused.
Yeah.
You can't afford to take extra weight.
Yeah.
You can't afford to dispose of anything because you've worked so hard to get it with you. So the idea of then, say, leaving waste on Mars, well, really the idea should be whatever you have to leave behind on Mars, the next person will be able to use.
Yep, absolutely.
And that includes the rovers. So I can well imagine that when we eventually get to Mars, someone will be able to refurbish and, get maybe the rovers going back again. Who knows?
Or at the very least, put it in a museum somewhere on Mars that tourists can visit.
I love it, Ben. I love it. You're thinking.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, we might wrap it up there. So don't forget our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can subscribe to our Vimeo, YouTube channels and RSS feeds. So and we've got our blogs on our website, and we greatly appreciate your visit. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.